The Lyle and Erik Menendez story. Chapter 1. The House of Whispers on Elm Drive. The house on North Elm Drive was a grand spectacle, a Spanish-style mansion that stood proudly against the bright California sky, its white stucco walls and red-tiled roof gleaming with an almost arrogant sense of perfection. The manicured lawn stretched out before it like an emerald carpet, leading to a sparkling pool surrounded by carefully placed palm trees that seemed to sway in time with the unspoken tensions within the home. It was a picture of wealth and success, a symbol of the American dream achieved through hard work and determination. But behind this carefully constructed facade, a darkness lurked, a secret that festered like a wound, slowly poisoning everything it touched. The house was a stage and a prison. The imposing wooden doors at the grand entrance seemed to both invite and repel, a gateway to a world of both privilege and pain. The large windows, like watchful eyes, silently observed the drama that unfolded within, reflecting the harsh California sun and the unspoken truths that were hidden within the walls. The rooms inside were spacious and opulent, filled with expensive furniture and carefully chosen artwork, all meticulously arranged to project an image of refined elegance. But the beautiful things were just a cover for a deep and growing sadness. The silence that often filled the air was like a heavy weight, pressing down on everything and everyone. The home was a gilded cage. The meticulously maintained exterior, the pristine landscaping, and the luxurious interiors were all part of an elaborate performance, a carefully constructed illusion that masked a deeper truth. The house was not a loving home, but a stage, a place where appearances were paramount and genuine emotion was suppressed. The family within was not a united front, but individuals trapped in their own worlds of pain and isolation, their connections tenuous and their relationships increasingly fractured. It was a place where unspoken resentments festered and where the weight of expectations was a crushing burden. The facade was starting to crack. This house, with all its grandeur and carefully curated design, was a testament to the fragility of the human condition, a chilling reminder that even behind the most perfect facades, darkness can take root and grow. It was a place where a family slowly unraveled, where unspoken resentments simmered beneath the surface, and where the weight of expectations eventually led to unspeakable violence. The house stood as a silent observer, a monument to a tragedy that would forever be etched into its walls. The beauty hid a monstrous truth. Chapter 2. Jose, the man of ruthless ambition. Jose Menendez was a man sculpted by his ambition, a self-made millionaire who had clawed his way to the top through sheer force of will and relentless determination. He was a man who valued control above all else, and his life was a carefully orchestrated pursuit of wealth and power, a relentless climb to the pinnacle of success. He always dressed in impeccably tailored suits, his shoes shined to a mirror finish, his face often set in a stern, unyielding expression that seemed to project an air of both arrogance and authority. He had come from nothing, and he was determined to have it all, and to make sure everyone knew it. He was a man who never forgot where he came from, and he made sure everyone else remembered it too. He viewed the world in terms of winners and losers, and he was determined to always be a winner, no matter the cost. He was a man who thrived on competition, driven by a fierce desire to be the best in every area of his life, whether it was in business or his personal life. He had a mind that was always in motion, constantly strategizing, calculating, and seeking new ways to expand his empire and consolidate his power. He was a man who saw the world as his chessboard, and he saw people as his pawns. He treated his family as an extension of himself, as just another facet of his carefully constructed world, expecting them to adhere to his rigid standards of success and perfection. He provided them with every material advantage, but he often failed to provide the genuine emotional connection that they so desperately craved. He showed his love through possessions and not feelings. His control extended to every aspect of their lives, creating an atmosphere of fear and stifled expression. He wanted to control everything. Jose was not a man known for his softness or vulnerability. He was a man who had faced hardship, and it had shaped him into a tough, unyielding force. He had learned to suppress his emotions and to see vulnerability as weakness. He believed in discipline and in a very rigid structure, and he expected everyone around him to adhere to his strict rules. He was always pushing, always demanding, and he was never satisfied. He was the king of his castle, and a tyrant as well. Chapter 3. Kitty, the Lost Soul in a Gilded Cage. Kitty Menendez, in her youth, had been a woman of vibrancy and charm, a social butterfly who effortlessly drew people to her with her warmth and her captivating smile. She possessed a natural beauty and an effortless grace, and she had a way of making everyone around her feel special. When she first met Jose, she had been swept away by his ambition and confidence, by his promises of a life filled with prosperity and ease. She saw his power, and she was drawn to his ability to seemingly control everything. She had been seduced by the idea of a perfect life with him, a life free from worry or want. Their early relationship had been a whirlwind of passion and romance, filled with grand gestures and declarations of love. They had imagined a future filled with shared dreams and endless happiness, a life of elegance and comfort where they would be the envy of all who knew them. She believed in his promises, and she had fully committed to the idea of building a perfect life together. She saw the future as a fairy tale. She thought he would make her happy, and she would be the perfect wife. But as the years passed, their love had slowly withered and faded, replaced by a sense of obligation and a growing resentment. Jose's all-consuming ambition had left little room for genuine intimacy or emotional connection, and Kitty's dreams had slowly been replaced by a sense of emptiness and isolation. She became a prisoner in her own gilded cage, trapped by the very lifestyle she had once craved. She had lost the woman she had been before Jose, replaced by the socialite she had become. She had traded herself for things she didn't really want. She poured her energy into maintaining appearances, cultivating her role as the perfect wife and mother, often at the expense of her own well-being. Her clothes were always immaculate, her hair perfectly coiffed, her smile always perfectly in place. But behind this carefully curated facade, there was a quiet sadness, a sense of longing for something more. She longed for real connection, to be truly seen for who she was. But it was a longing that she was afraid to express. She was trapped and slowly fading away. Chapter 4. Lyle, the boy who craved approval. Lyle Menendez, from a young age, had been a whirlwind of restless energy, always seeking his father's approval, always trying to prove his worth. He had grown up in a world of privilege, but he had also grown up feeling inadequate, as if he could never measure up to the impossible standards that were set for him. He was a child caught in the shadow of his father's towering ambition, always striving to earn his love, but constantly failing to achieve the elusive validation that he so desperately craved. He had a deep need to be seen, and he felt like he was always invisible. He was an energetic child, always moving, always doing, always trying to be noticed, even if it was for the wrong reasons. He was always testing boundaries, always pushing limits in an attempt to gain his father's attention. He seemed to thrive on chaos, his energy often manifesting in impulsive decisions and reckless behavior. His need for attention was a constant and overwhelming force in his life. He always sought validation, and he often sought it in the wrong places. As he grew older, the weight of his father's expectations became a crushing burden, fueling his simmering resentment and his growing sense of inadequacy. He tried to find his own path, to break free from his father's control, but his attempts were often ill-fated and poorly planned, driven by a desperate need to prove himself. He was caught in a cycle of trying and failing, and his anger grew with each perceived failure. He was always running from something. He was like a storm brewing beneath the surface, a volatile mix of anger, frustration, and despair. He was a man caught between his need for his father's love and his desire for freedom. He was desperately trying to find himself, to forge his own identity, but he was constantly being held back by the weight of his past. He was a man at war with himself, a storm about to break. He was always trying to be better, but he was never good enough. Chapter 5. Erik, the silent witness of sorrow. Erik Menendez, unlike his brother, was a quiet and introspective child, a keen observer who seemed to possess a deep understanding of the unspoken dynamics within his family. He was a sensitive soul, an artistic spirit who found solace in his drawings and his music, using his creativity as an escape from the oppressive atmosphere of his home. He seemed to carry a weight of sorrow, his bright eyes often reflecting the pain and suffering he witnessed around him. He felt the unspoken emotions, the hidden sadness, and the growing tension that permeated the very walls of their home. He was a silent witness to the unfolding tragedy, his mind absorbing all of the details, both large and small, of his family's dysfunction. He could feel the unspoken pain, the hidden resentment, and the growing sense of hopelessness that seemed to be consuming them all. He was like a sponge, absorbing all the negative energy that surrounded him. He understood everything, but he was powerless to change anything. His art and music became a way for him to process the complex emotions he struggled to express in words, allowing him to create a space of beauty and solace in the face of darkness and despair. He poured his soul into his creative pursuits, seeking refuge in the world he created, a world where he could find some sense of peace and understanding. He used his creativity to cope with the pain he felt. He was trying to build a world where he could be free. He longed for a different life, a life where he could be himself without fear of judgment or criticism. He dreamed of freedom, of a place where he could express his true feelings, but he felt trapped by the suffocating weight of his circumstances. He carried a burden of sadness that was too heavy for a child to bear. He felt lost and alone, like an outsider in his own family, forced to witness the slow destruction of their lives. He was a prisoner in his own home. Chapter 6. The Erosion of Love's Foundation. As the years rolled on, the love between Jose and Kitty began to crumble, like an old building slowly falling apart. Jose became more and more consumed by his work, his ambition taking over everything, leaving little room for his wife and family. He had less and less time for Kitty, their conversations becoming short and meaningless, and their intimacy was disappearing like a ghost. The passion they once shared was now a distant memory, a reminder of a love that had faded and died a long time ago. He was married to his work, not to his wife. Kitty, in response, became more withdrawn and distant, her own dreams and aspirations slowly fading into the background. She felt like she had lost her voice, her sense of self, replaced by the demands of her role as the perfect wife and mother. She started to live for the outside world, forgetting about what was going on inside her. She was a shadow of her former self, a woman who had given up on her own dreams. She was lost in her own life. She was trapped in her gilded cage. Their home, once a haven of love, became a cold and empty place, a stage for their carefully constructed charade. They went through the motions of a perfect marriage, but the truth was, there was no love left, just an obligation. They were two strangers sharing a space. The silence between them grew louder with each passing year, like a painful reminder of the emotional distance that separated them. Their lack of honesty was killing them. The slow erosion of their love had a deep impact on their children, creating an atmosphere of tension and unease within the family. They watched as their parents drifted further apart, learning that love was conditional, something based on outside things, not on real feelings or connection. The boys grew up seeing the slow death of their parents' relationship, and the seeds of anger and resentment were being sown in their young hearts. The foundations of their family were crumbling. They watched as their parents drifted further apart, learning that love was conditional, something based on outside things, not on real feelings or connection. The boys grew up seeing the slow death of their parents' relationship, and the seeds of anger and resentment were being sown in their young hearts. The foundations of their family were crumbling. Chapter 7. The Unspoken Words That Wounded. The Menendez home was a place where much was left unsaid, where feelings were kept hidden, and where the unspoken words often cut deeper than anything spoken out loud. The family communicated through a strange language of subtle cues, veiled threats, and long, tense silences, which created an atmosphere of unease and unspoken fear. They were masters at hiding their feelings, but those feelings still had an impact, creating a web of unspoken truths that lingered in the air. The house was a master of unspoken communication. The unspoken anger and resentment showed up in small things, like a tightening of a jaw, a quick glance, or a long silence that could be more hurtful than any insult. The boys grew to be masters at reading these subtle cues, always on edge, always trying to understand the hidden meaning behind what was not being said. They were like detectives, always searching for the truth that was being hidden from them. They were always walking on eggshells. The lack of real, honest talk created a feeling of loneliness and disconnection within the family, making them feel like strangers living under the same roof. They longed for connection, for a sense of true closeness, but they were trapped in a world of superficial interactions and hidden emotions. The lack of honesty created a huge barrier between them. They were living in their own isolated worlds. The silence in the Menendez home was like a sign of how broken they were, a testament to their inability to express their true feelings. They were like prisoners behind their own walls, unable to reach out for help or to be truly seen. They were trapped in their own private hells. The unspoken words became weapons, wounding each other more deeply than any argument ever could. The house was built on lies and secrets. Chapter 8. A family fractured and falling apart. The Menendez family, despite their wealth and privilege, was a family that was broken and falling apart, each member caught in their own cycle of pain and isolation. Jose was consumed by his own selfish goals, unable to see the needs of his wife and children, treating them more like objects or trophies rather than people he loved. He was so focused on his own life, he had forgotten about his family. They were just accessories in his world. Kitty was lost in her own world of pretending, always worried about what people thought, unable to offer any real support or connection to her sons. She had become a prisoner of her own making, unable to break free from her perfect image. She was just going through the motions. She was emotionally unavailable. She had disappeared into her own world. Lyle, caught between his need for his father's approval and his deep anger towards him, was like a ticking time bomb. His frustration building up inside, always ready to explode. He was at war with himself and with his family. He was filled with a simmering rage. He was unable to find any sense of peace. Erik retreated further into himself, using his art and music as a way to escape from the pain of his family, becoming more isolated and withdrawn from the reality of his life. He was watching it all unfold and feeling helpless to stop it. He felt the weight of their suffering. He was a shadow in his own home. The Menendez home had become a place where everyone was alone, unable to connect with each other. They were a family only in name, their relationships shattered, their lives growing more separate by the day. They were all hurting, but they couldn't reach out to each other. They were trapped, each one alone in their own personal hell. The family was broken beyond repair, each one lost in their own personal struggles. Chapter 9: The Gathering Storm on Elm Drive. As time went on, the atmosphere in the Menendez home grew darker and heavier, like a storm cloud gathering over the house, promising to release its fury. The tension was thick and suffocating, the air charged with unspoken resentments and hidden anger. It was as if they were all living on top of a volcano, always waiting for the inevitable eruption. The house was filled with an unspoken dread. They all felt the weight of it. The boys grew more desperate, their individual struggles intensifying, their pain becoming more and more visible to those around them. Lyle's failures fueled his anger and frustration, making him more reckless and out of control. Erik retreated further into his own world, becoming more isolated, his sadness growing deeper with each passing day. They both were looking for some way to escape the pain they were enduring. They were drowning in their own despair. Jose and Kitty, focused on their own worlds of ambition and appearances, seemed completely blind to the growing despair that surrounded them, unable to recognize the signs of their impending breakdown. They were living in their own bubble of denial, unable to see the danger that was right in front of them. They were trapped by their own self-absorption. They were deaf and blind to what was happening. The gathering clouds of resentment, anger, and despair slowly enveloped the Menendez home, creating an atmosphere of fear and impending doom. The carefully constructed facade of the family was ready to collapse, the secrets and lies about to be exposed for the whole world to see. Something terrible was going to happen, and no one could stop it. It was the calm before the storm. Chapter 10: Standing at the Edge of the Abyss. On the evening of August 20th, the tension in the Menendez household was stretched to its breaking point, like a rope pulled too tight. It was a night where years of unspoken pain, hidden anger, and unresolved conflicts finally came to a head. The family was together, but they were more divided than ever. The atmosphere was thick with a heavy sense of dread. It was as if they were all standing on the edge of a cliff, about to fall into the darkness. The air was charged with an unspoken terror. The individual struggles of each family member had reached a fever pitch, their despair and frustration finally overwhelming them. Lyle was consumed by his anger and his need for control. Erik was sinking under the weight of his sadness and his hopelessness. They were both trapped in a cycle of pain that seemed inescapable. They had reached their breaking point. Their ability to cope with their reality was completely gone. Jose and Kitty, caught in their own worlds, seemed oblivious to the storm that was raging around them, continuing their routines as if nothing was wrong. They were blind to the growing desperation of their sons, unable to see the warning signs that were right in front of them. They were trapped by their own selfish desires. They were so focused on themselves, they couldn't see the destruction they were creating. That night, the Menendez family stood at the edge of an abyss, their carefully constructed world ready to crumble. The tension had become unbearable. The unspoken resentments were like a volcano, ready to erupt. They were all caught in a cycle of self-destruction. They were headed towards a dark and terrible place. The darkness was about to swallow them whole. Chapter 11. The night the darkness descended. The events of that night were a brutal and horrific act of violence, a culmination of years of pain and despair. It was a terrifying night, one that would forever change the course of their lives. It was like the gates of hell had opened in their home. Their carefully constructed reality came crashing down. Jose and Kitty were brutally attacked, their lives stolen in a storm of gunfire and anger. It was not a clean or quick act, but a brutal unleashing of years of pent-up rage, a desperate and terrible attempt to break free from the chains that bound them. Their bodies were left broken and bleeding, a terrible picture of the violence that had taken place. Their lives ended in a terrible and brutal way. The Menendez home, once a symbol of wealth and privilege, was now transformed into a scene of unspeakable horror, its silence shattered by the sounds of violence and death. The beautiful rooms were stained with blood, the perfect images now a twisted reflection of a terrible nightmare. It was a scene of pure chaos and destruction. The beauty was all gone. That night was a turning point for the Menendez family, a moment that would forever define their lives. They crossed a line, one that could never be uncrossed. Their world imploded. Their fate was sealed. The darkness had descended and it had consumed them all. There was no turning back. The horror had begun. Chapter 12. The Lies That Covered Up the Truth. In the chaos after the violence, Lyle, his voice shaking, made a frantic call to 911, trying to create a web of lies and deceit to make himself and his brother look like the victims of a random home invasion. He lied to the police, telling them that intruders had broken into their house and attacked their parents. He was trying to rewrite the story to escape the consequences of what they had done. He was trying to create his own truth. He described the horrific scene with a chilling calm, using words carefully crafted to paint a picture of a senseless act of violence. He was playing a role, pretending to be the grieving son, trying to convince everyone, including himself, that he was innocent. He was acting out a lie. He was trying to hide his guilt. The police arrived at the scene, their presence a stark contrast to the silence that now enveloped the house. The investigation began, and the carefully constructed lies began to unravel. The inconsistencies in their stories, the lack of forced entry, and their strange behaviors all raised suspicions in the minds of the detectives. They were starting to see the truth through the lies. The web of lies that Lyle tried so hard to create was ultimately unsustainable, the truth slowly breaking through the facade that he had so desperately tried to maintain. He was trying to cover up a truth that was too big to hide, and the weight of it was starting to crush him. The lies were starting to crumble. The truth was coming. Chapter 13. The Truth Finally Revealed. As the police investigation moved forward, the truth about the Menendez family began to surface, exposing the darkness and dysfunction that had been hidden for so long. The stories of abuse, the years of pent-up rage, and the despair finally spilled out into the open, painting a disturbing picture of a family consumed by its own pain. The world would see the ugliness that they had hidden. Their secrets were finally out. The family's perfect image, a facade so carefully maintained, was shattered, replaced by the stark reality of their broken existence. The hidden resentments, the unspoken frustrations, and the deep-seated pain were finally brought into the light, showing the world what their lives had really been like. They were no longer hiding. The secrets were out. Their private world was now on display. Erik's confession, a torrent of guilt and remorse, became the final piece of the puzzle. He could no longer carry the weight of the secret, his conscience finally overwhelming him. He told his therapist the truth about that night, exposing his own demons and bringing their deception to an end. The truth was finally out. The lies had ended. The real story was about to be told. The truth was brutal, a story of a family consumed by darkness, a tale of pain and despair that had ultimately led to a horrific act of violence. The lies had been peeled away, revealing a tragedy that was both horrifying and heartbreaking. The darkness was finally in the light. The truth could no longer be ignored. The secrets were out. Chapter 14. The Scales of Justice Weigh Heavy. The trial of Lyle and Erik Menendez became a national spectacle, a public display of a family consumed by its own darkness. The courtroom was transformed into a stage where the details of their lives were laid bare for all the world to see. It was a circus of public fascination, their private lives becoming a form of grotesque entertainment. The world was watching their every move. The prosecution portrayed them as cold-blooded killers, driven by greed and a desire for their inheritance. The defense attempted to paint them as victims of severe abuse, arguing that their actions were the result of a lifetime of trauma and manipulation. Two different stories were being told. It was a fight for their lives, a battle of narratives. The testimony was disturbing and graphic, filled with accounts of abuse, violence, and betrayal. It was a painful and harrowing experience for everyone involved. The world was forced to see the ugly truth of their family, a broken system built on secrets and abuse. The private pain was now made public. The trial became a chilling reminder of the darkness that can exist within families, of the devastating consequences of abuse, and the importance of speaking out about hidden pain. It was a lesson learned at the expense of a broken family. The scales of justice were about to weigh the truth. The world waited for a verdict. Chapter 15. The Unfading Scars of a Broken Family. The jury, after listening to the evidence and weighing the arguments, found Lyle and Erik Menendez guilty of first-degree murder. They were sentenced to life in prison, their freedom taken away, forever marked by the terrible act they had committed. They were finally held responsible for their crimes. Their fate was sealed. Justice had been served. The price had been paid. Even with the verdict, questions remained, questions that may never be fully answered. Were they monsters, or were they also victims? Was it possible for them to be both? What role did the family play in their tragedy? The questions lingered in the air, a reminder of the complexities of human nature, of the devastating consequences of abuse and neglect, and the fine line between victim and perpetrator. The questions continued to linger. The house on Elm Drive stood as a silent witness to the tragedy, a haunting reminder of the darkness that can fester behind the most perfect facades. It became a monument to a broken family, a place forever stained by violence and despair. The house would never again be a home. It was now a symbol of a tragic past. It was a reminder of the darkness within us all. The story of the Menendez brothers continues to echo through our collective memory, a chilling reminder of a family consumed by pain and dysfunction. It serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the importance of truth and honesty, of the devastating consequences of silence, and the urgent need to break the cycle of abuse. Their story is a scar that would never fully heal, a mark on the history that would never be forgotten. The story would live on, a testament to a broken family.